The crystal goblet slipped from Thea Caldwell's trembling fingers, and time seemed to fracture into 1,000 slow-motion shards as crimson liquid arced through the air and splashed across the pristine white silk of the most dangerous man in the room. Not a man. A vampire. The Vampire King. The ballroom fell silent so quickly it felt like the air itself had been stolen. 200 guests in glittering gowns and immaculate suits froze mid-conversation, mid-laugh, mid-breath. The orchestra's violins squeaked to a discordant halt. Even the candles in the massive chandeliers seemed to dim, as if the flames themselves were cowering. Thea's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she thought it might shatter through bone. The blood wine, thick, dark, impossibly red, dripped from the Vampire King's jaw, staining his collar, spreading across his chest like an accusation. His eyes, pale as winter ice and just as merciless, lifted slowly to meet hers. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think past the single screaming thought that she was about to die. Lord Valerius Nocturne, king of the Eastern Vampire Court, ruler of the shadow territories that stretched beneath 5 modern cities, looked at the trembling waitress who had just humiliated him in front of the entire supernatural elite. His expression was unreadable, carved from marble and moonlight. His white hair, pulled back in an elegant style that spoke of centuries of refinement, gleamed under the chandelier light. His pale skin seemed to glow with an otherworldly luminescence that made him appear both beautiful and utterly inhuman. The silence stretched. Someone in the crowd whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Thea's mouth opened, trying to form an apology, but her voice had abandoned her completely. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the silver tray she still clutched. Valerius tilted his head slightly, studying her with those penetrating eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, controlled, and carried through the vast ballroom with preternatural clarity. "Everyone out." 2 words, spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they detonated through the room like a bomb. The guests didn't question, didn't hesitate. Vampires and their human companions alike moved toward the exits with supernatural speed, their expensive shoes clicking frantically against marble floors. Within 30 seconds, the ballroom that had been packed with bodies and noise and laughter was empty except for Thea and the king she'd just drenched in blood wine. The massive doors swung shut with a boom that echoed like a death knell. Thea finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to my hands, I'm new, and I was nervous, and I stopped talking." She stopped. Her entire body trembled now, not just her hands. She'd heard the stories about Valerius Nocturne. Everyone had. He'd ruled for over 800 years. He had ended rebellions with such brutal efficiency that his enemies' screams were said to still echo in certain underground chambers. He was ancient, powerful, and absolutely merciless to those who showed him disrespect. And she just dumped wine all over him at his own gala. Valerius rose from his seat at the head table with fluid grace, each movement precise and predatory. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and his frame was lean but clearly powerful beneath his ruined designer suit. He plucked a silk handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the blood wine from his face with deliberate slowness. "What's your name?" he asked. "Thea Caldwell." She forced the words through her constricted throat. "How long have you worked at Elegance Catering, Thea Caldwell?" "This is my first event. I started 3 days ago." The admission felt like signing her own death warrant. Valerius's pale eyes narrowed slightly. "Your first event, and they sent you to serve at a vampire gala?" They were short-staffed. Someone called in sick. Thea knew she should stop talking, but terror was making her babble. "I told them I wasn't ready, but they said I'd be fine, that I just had to serve drinks and not make eye contact with anyone important, and I was doing okay until I saw you. And I froze. I've never seen a vampire before tonight. I know that's stupid, living in this city, but I grew up in a small town where there weren't any, and when you looked at me, You froze," Valerius finished, his voice still maddeningly calm. "Yes." Thea wanted to cry, but she refused to give in to it. She'd already humiliated herself enough. "I'm sorry. I'll pay for the suit. I'll work double shifts. I'll do whatever you want. Please don't kill me." Something flickered across Valerius's face too quickly for her to read. He took a step closer, and every instinct in Thea's body screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The doors were closed, and even if they weren't, he could catch her before she made it 3 steps. "Do you know why I cleared the room, Thea?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because half the vampires in attendance would have demanded your execution for the insult you just delivered. The old laws are very clear about showing disrespect to royalty." He took another step closer. The scent of blood wine and something darker, something that smelled like night air and old stone, washed over her. "They would have called for your blood. Some would have volunteered to carry out the sentence themselves, simply to curry my favor." Thea's knees went weak. "Are you going to kill me?" Valerius stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His expression was still unreadable, but something in those pale eyes seemed almost curious. "No," he said simply. "I'm not going to kill you." The relief that flooded through Thea was so intense she actually swayed on her feet. Valerius's hand shot out, steadying her with a grip that was gentle despite the obvious strength behind it. His skin was cool against her arm, but not unpleasantly so. "However," he continued, and her relief evaporated instantly, "there will be consequences. The court will expect it. If I simply let you walk away, it will be seen as weakness. Worse, it will appear that humans can disrespect vampire royalty without repercussion. That cannot be allowed." "What kind of consequences?" Thea whispered. Valerius released her arm and stepped back, considering. His ruined shirt clung to his chest, still damp with blood wine. Even disheveled and stained, he looked regal, powerful, dangerous. "You will work for me directly," he said finally. "As my personal attendant. You'll reside in my estate, learn proper court etiquette, and serve me until such time as I deem your debt repaid." Thea blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You want me to work for you?" "It's either that or I hand you over to the court for judgment. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice at all. Working for a vampire king sounded terrifying, but at least she'd be alive. "Probably? Maybe." "For how long?" she asked. "That depends entirely on how quickly you learn." A ghost of something that might have been amusement touched his lips. "And how well you can manage to avoid spilling things on me in the future." "I'll do it," Thea said quickly. "I'll work for you. Thank you. I mean, not thank you for making me work for you, but thank you for not killing me, which I know is a low bar, but I really do appreciate it, and I promise I'll do better, I'll be perfect, Thea." "Yes?" "Stop talking." She pressed her lips together and nodded. Valerius pulled out his phone. Even ancient vampire kings had smartphones apparently, and typed something quickly. "My driver will take you home. Pack whatever you need. He'll bring you to the estate tonight." "Tonight?" Thea's voice pitched higher. "As in, right now tonight?" "The court will hear about this incident within the hour. By morning, vampires all across the city will know the human who spilled blood wine on me. If you remain in your apartment, you'll be a target. My estate is warded. You'll be safe there." The word safe, coming from a vampire king, should have sounded absurd, but there was something in Valerius's tone that made her believe him, or maybe she was just in shock. That seemed likely. "Okay," she managed. "I'll pack." Valerius studied her for another long moment, those pale eyes seeming to see straight through her skin to something beneath. Then he nodded once, sharply. "Good. Don't try to run. I would find you, and then we'd have a very different conversation." Thea nodded frantically, still clutching her silver tray like a shield. Valerius turned and walked toward a side door that Thea hadn't even noticed, his movements flowing like water. He paused at the threshold and glanced back. "For what it's worth, Thea Caldwell, you're the first person in 3 centuries to surprise me. That's not entirely unpleasant." Then he was gone, leaving Thea alone in the vast, empty ballroom with a racing heart and the strangest feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand. The estate was not what Thea expected. She'd imagined something gothic and foreboding, all stone towers and dark corners. Instead, Valerius's home was a sprawling modern mansion built into the hillside overlooking the city, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. The interior was minimalist but luxurious, decorated in shades of white, gray, and deep blue, with art that looked both ancient and priceless adorning the walls. A stern-faced woman with silver hair and the pale skin of a vampire met Thea at the door. She introduced herself as Isolde, the estate manager, and led Thea through a maze of corridors to a bedroom that was larger than Thea's entire apartment had been. "Lord Valerius has retired for the evening," Isolde said crisply. "You'll meet with him tomorrow at sunset. Until then, you're to remain in this wing. Don't wander. Some areas of the estate are not safe for humans." That was comforting. Isolde handed her a thick leather-bound book. "Study this. It contains the basic rules of vampire court etiquette. Lord Valerius will expect you to have read it by tomorrow." Thea took the book, which had to weigh at least 5 pounds. "All of it?" "All of it." Isolde's expression didn't change. "Breakfast will be brought to your room at 8. Don't leave before then." She left before Thea could ask any of the 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. Thea set down her hastily packed duffel bag and sank onto the bed, which was ridiculously comfortable. The events of the night felt surreal, like something from a fever dream. Just this morning, she'd been worried about making rent. Now she was living in a vampire king's mansion because she'd accidentally baptized him with blood wine. Her life had officially become insane. She opened the etiquette book and started reading. By page 10, she'd learned that making direct eye contact with vampire royalty without permission was considered and challenged to their authority. By page 20, she discovered there were 17 different ways to bow depending on the vampire's rank and the social context. By page 50, her eyes were crossing and her brain felt like it was melting. She fell asleep with the book open on her chest, fully clothed, and dreamed of pale eyes and moonlight. The next evening, Isolde led Thea to Valerius's study. The room was lined with books from floor to ceiling, thousands of volumes in dozens of languages. Valerius sat behind a massive desk, reading something on a tablet. He'd changed into a fresh suit, this one midnight blue, and he looked every inch the powerful immortal ruler that he was. He glanced up as Thea entered, and she remembered to bow, or she tried to. She wasn't entirely sure she got the angle right. "Did you read the book?" Valerius asked without preamble. "Most of it, about 2/3. I fell asleep around the section on proper wine service at formal dinners, which is ironic considering how we met." The corner of Valerius's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. "Sit." Thea sat in the chair across from his desk, trying not to fidget. In the better light, she could see details she'd missed the night before. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his jaw strong, his cheekbones high. He was beautiful in a way that seemed designed to lure prey closer. She forced herself to look away. "Why did you move to the city, Thea?" Valerius asked, setting down his tablet. The question surprised her. "I wanted something different from small-town life. Better opportunities. My mom died last year, and there wasn't anything keeping me there anymore." "No father?" "Never knew him. It was just me and Mom." Thea twisted her hands in her lap. "She worked 3 jobs to put me through community college. I wanted to make her proud, build a real career, but it's been harder than I expected. The catering job was supposed to be temporary, just until I could find something in graphic design." Valerius listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word was being cataloged and analyzed. "You have a degree in graphic design?" "Associate's degree, yes. Not that it's helped much. Turns out everyone wants 3 to 5 years of experience for entry-level positions." She caught herself. "Sorry. You probably don't care about my employment struggles. On the contrary, I find it useful to know the people who work for me." Valerius leaned back in his chair. "Your duties here will include standard attendant work, managing my schedule, preparing my evening meal, accompanying me to various functions. However, I also require someone to redesign the court's website and social media presence. Most vampires are terrible with modern technology. If you can handle both responsibilities, I'll pay you substantially more than you would have earned at any entry-level design position." Thea stared at him. "You want to pay me?" "Did you think this would be slavery?" Valerius raised an eyebrow. "I may be a vampire, Thea, but I'm not a monster. You'll receive a generous salary, room and board, and full benefits. This is employment, not imprisonment." "But you said it was a consequence for spilling wine on you." "The consequence is that you have no choice in accepting the position. The terms of your employment, however, are fair. I don't believe in exploitation." His pale eyes held hers. "Though, if you try to run or betray me, That fairness will evaporate quickly. The threat was delivered calmly, almost pleasantly, which somehow made it more frightening. Thea nodded quickly. Understood. Good. Isolde will train you on your daily duties. I expect you to learn quickly. Valerius stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Tonight, you'll accompany me to a meeting with the Western Court's ambassador. Consider it your introduction to vampire politics. Tonight? But I don't know anything about vampire politics. I barely finished the etiquette book. I'll mess something up. Probably, Valerius agreed. Try to make it less catastrophic than last night. He walked past her toward the door, then paused. And Thea? Wear something elegant. First impressions matter, especially in our world. Isolde has already placed appropriate clothing in your room. The meeting took place in a restaurant that Thea had passed 100 times but never dared enter. It was the kind of place that didn't list prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The entire establishment had been reserved for the evening, and vampire security in dark suits watched every entrance with predatory awareness. Thea felt ridiculous in the dress Isolde had selected, a sophisticated black sheath that probably cost more than her car. But when Valerius had seen her, he had given a single nod of approval, and she'd felt an absurd flush of pleasure at his acceptance. Now she sat quietly beside him at an intimate table while he spoke with Ambassador Lucien Duval, a French vampire with dark eyes and an easy charm that seemed calculated to disarm. She was supposed to observe and learn, not speak unless directly addressed. The Western Court grows concerned about your expansion, Valerius, Lucien said, swirling blood wine in his glass. His gaze flickered to Thea briefly before returning to the king. When you absorbed the southern territories, we assumed it was a temporary measure. It's been 15 years. The South needed stable leadership after their king's assassination, Valerius replied coolly. I provided it. The territories are thriving. Or you're building an empire. Lucien's smile didn't reach his eyes. Lady Morgana wonders if the Eastern King has ambitions beyond his traditional borders. Lady Morgana should worry less about my ambitions and more about the rebellion brewing in her own territories. I hear whispers that several of her lords are unhappy with her leadership. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lucien's pleasant expression froze. Careful, Valerius. Those are dangerous accusations. I deal in information, not accusations. Valerius leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air. If Morgana wants peace between our courts, she should focus on maintaining order in her own house before questioning how I manage mine. Lucien's jaw tightened. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. Perhaps the Eastern King has grown arrogant in his long rule. Perhaps he forgets that even ancient powers can fall. Is that a threat? Valerius's voice remained calm, almost bored, but Thea felt something change in his presence. The air grew heavier, charged with an invisible pressure that made it hard to breathe. She realized with sudden clarity that she was watching one apex predator face off against another, and despite Lucien's bravado, he was outmatched. Lucien must have felt it too, because he carefully set down his wineglass and raised both hands in a placating gesture. Merely an observation. I came here seeking understanding, not conflict. Then let me make our position clear. Valerius leaned forward slightly, and the pressure intensified. The Eastern Court will continue to govern its territories as I see fit. If the Western Court has concerns, Lady Morgana is welcome to address them with me directly, rather than sending ambassadors to deliver veiled threats. And if she's entertaining thoughts of more aggressive action, remind her what happened to the last vampire monarch who declared war on my territories. Thea didn't know what had happened, but based on Lucien's expression, it hadn't ended well for them. I'll relay your message, Lucien said quietly. See that you do? Valerius stood, and Thea quickly followed suit. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Ambassador. The meal is on me. He placed a hand on the small of Thea's back, the touch light, but somehow possessive, and guided her out of the restaurant. She waited until they were in his car, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than a house, before speaking. Was that normal? She asked. Valerius glanced at her as his driver pulled into traffic. Define normal. The part where it felt like you two might start killing each other right there in the restaurant. That was remarkably restrained by vampire diplomatic standards. He loosened his tie slightly. Lucian was testing boundaries, seeing if I'd respond to provocations, if I appeared weak or distracted. Distracted by what? By you. Thea blinked. Me. You're human, my new attendant, the girl who spilled blood wine on me at my own gala, and yet somehow still lives and works at my side. Valerius's pale eyes studied her in the dim car interior. That raises questions. Lucian was trying to determine if you're a vulnerability he can exploit. Am I? Thea asked quietly. A vulnerability? Valerius was silent for a long moment. That remains to be seen. Over the following weeks, Thea learned more about vampire society than she'd ever imagined existed. She attended meetings with ancient creatures who'd witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. She learned to distinguish between the subtle power plays that governed supernatural politics. She discovered that Valerius ruled not through fear alone, but through a combination of strategic brilliance, overwhelming power, and an unwavering code of honor that his people respected. She also learned that he was nothing like the monster she'd expected. Yes, he was dangerous. She never forgot that. But he was also surprisingly fair in his judgments, quick to defend those under his protection, and possessed of a dry wit that caught her off guard. He asked her opinion on matters of court business, actually listened to her answers, and implemented several of her suggestions for modernizing communications between territories. The website redesign was going well. She'd created something that balanced elegance with functionality, maintaining the gravitas expected of vampire royalty while making the information accessible to younger generations. Valerius had reviewed her work with genuine appreciation, and his rare words of praise had made her feel like she'd won an Olympic medal. She was also becoming aware of another problem, an increasingly significant problem. She was developing feelings for her employer, her vampire king employer, the ancient, powerful, undead ruler of the Eastern Court who could kill her with one hand and barely notice the effort. It was possibly the worst idea she'd ever had, and that was including the time she'd tried to dye her own hair in high school and ended up orange for 3 months. The realization hit her fully one evening when Valerius was preparing to attend a formal court session. She'd been helping him with his cufflinks, a task that required her to stand close, to touch his wrists, to breathe in that scent of night air and old stone that she'd come to associate with safety. He'd looked down at her as she worked, those pale eyes soft in a way she rarely saw, and said, "You've done well, Thea. Far better than I anticipated." Her heart had stuttered in her chest. "Thank you. I think your debt is nearly paid. Another month, perhaps, and you'll be free to leave if you wish." She should have been thrilled. Instead, the thought of leaving made her chest ache. "What if I don't wish to leave?" Valerius had gone very still. "Why would you want to stay?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," she'd thought. "Because when you look at me like I matter, like I'm more than just a clumsy human who made a mess, I feel more alive than I've ever felt before. Because despite everything that should make this wrong, being near you feels right. I like the work," she'd said instead, coward that she was, "and I haven't finished the social media strategy yet." Something had flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. She couldn't tell. "Then you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like." Now, 3 days later, Thea was trying to focus on updating the court's Instagram presence. Apparently even vampires needed social media when Isolde appeared in her doorway, looking more agitated than Thea had ever seen her. "Lord Valerius requires your presence in his study immediately," Isolde said. "There's been an incident." Thea's stomach dropped. "What kind of incident?" "Just go, now." She ran through the corridors, her heart pounding. When she burst into Valerius's study, she found him standing by the window, his posture rigid with tension. Another vampire stood nearby, younger looking but still radiating power. His white hair was shorter than Valerius's, his features sharp and hungry. "Ah, the famous human," the stranger said, looking Thea up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "I can see the appeal. She's quite lovely, in a fragile sort of way." "Thea, this is Lord Dmitri Corvus, ambassador from the Northern Court," Valerius said without turning from the window. His voice was colder than she'd ever heard it. "Dmitri, I'd appreciate it if you didn't look at my attendant like she's a meal." Dmitri laughed. "Forgive me, it's been a long journey and I haven't fed properly in days. The sight of such fresh blood is distracting." Thea instinctively took a step back, bumping against the closed door behind her. "Control yourself," Valerius said, finally turning. His pale eyes had darkened to something that looked like polished steel. "State your business and leave." "Very well." Dimitri's amusement faded. "King Razvan sends word. He knows about your human. More specifically, he knows that you've shown her extraordinary favoritism despite her disrespecting you publicly. He believes this indicates weakness, softness, a willingness to bend ancient laws for the sake of a pretty face." "Razvan can believe whatever he likes. He's challenged your authority." Dimitri pulled a sealed letter from his jacket and placed it on Valerius's desk. "Formally, in accordance with the old laws, either you prove your strength by executing the human who offended you, or you face him in ritual combat to defend your decision to spare her." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Thea stopped breathing. Valerius picked up the letter, broke the seal, and scanned it quickly. His expression revealed nothing. "When?" "3 nights from now. The challenge must be answered within the week, as per tradition." Dimitri smiled unpleasantly. "Razvan is confident. He's 2 centuries younger than you, Valerius, and he's been training specifically for this. Some say he's the finest warrior the Northern Court has produced in a millennium. Then, some are easily impressed. Are you truly willing to risk your throne, your territories, your life for a human girl you've known less than 2 months?" Dimitri's voice dripped with disbelief. "Just kill her. It's the logical choice. She's nothing. You're a king." Valerius moved so fast Thea didn't see it. One moment he was behind his desk, the next he had Dimitri slammed against the wall with one hand around his throat. "She," he said softly, dangerously, "is under my protection. That makes her more valuable than 1,000 northern ambassadors. Do I make myself clear?" Dimitri managed a strangled nod. Valerius released him and stepped back, his expression returning to its usual calm. "Tell Razvan I accept his challenge. I'll meet him at the appointed time and place, and tell him to prepare his affairs because he won't be returning home." Dimitri straightened his jacket with shaking hands. He looked between Valerius and Thea, something like wonder crossing his face. "You actually care for her. Get out." Dimitri left without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Thea found her voice. "What just happened? What is ritual combat?" Valerius returned to the window, his back to her. "An old law. When a vampire of sufficient rank believes another's decision shows weakness that threatens their credibility as a leader, they can issue a formal challenge. The accused must either reverse the decision or defend it in single combat." "Combat, as in a fight to the death?" "Yes, because of me, because you didn't kill me for spilling wine on you." Thea felt dizzy. "Valerius, you can't. I'm not worth dying for." He turned then, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. "That's not your decision to make." "Then let me make this decision." She stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. If I'm gone, maybe he'll withdraw the challenge." "He won't. The challenge has been issued. My honor demands I answer it." Valerius moved toward her with that fluid grace that never failed to mesmerize her. "And even if that weren't true, I wouldn't allow you to run. You're mine to protect, Thea. I took responsibility for you the moment I sent everyone from that ballroom. I don't abandon my people. I'm not one of your people. I'm just a human who made a mistake. You're my attendant. You work in my household. You've earned the respect of my court through your intelligence and dedication. That makes you one of mine." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "And perhaps you're more than that." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What do you mean?" Valerius reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His cool fingers brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Dimitri was right about one thing. I care for you, more than I should, more than is wise." "I care for you too," Thea whispered. "I know it's crazy. I know I'm human and you're a vampire king and this is impossible, but I can't help it. When I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Something fierce and possessive flashed in Valerius's eyes. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch achingly tender despite the obvious strength in his fingers. If I fight Razvan and lose, you'll be vulnerable. Promise me you'll leave the city immediately. Isolde will have funds prepared and safe passage arranged. Stop talking like you're going to die. I've survived 800 years by preparing for every eventuality. Then prepare for this one. Thea grabbed his wrists, holding his hands against her face. Prepare to win. Prepare to come back to me. Prepare for whatever this is between us to have a chance to become something real. Valerius closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were filled with an emotion so raw it made her chest ache. I've lived centuries, Thea. I've known thousands of people, ruled vast territories, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and in all that time I've never met anyone who made me want to be more than what I am. Until you. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd expected. It wasn't cold or frightening or inhuman. It was gentle and desperate and absolutely perfect. His lips were cooler than a human's, but they moved against hers with a tenderness that made her melt. She wound her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and felt him respond with a hunger that he carefully kept leashed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valerius rested his forehead against hers. I will come back to you, he said. That's a promise, Thea. I didn't wait 800 years to find you only to lose you 3 days later. The next 3 days were torture. Valerius spent most of his time in training, working with his weapons master to prepare for the ritual combat. Thea tried to focus on work, but her concentration was shattered. She kept thinking about Valerius facing another vampire in a fight to the death, kept imagining him not coming back. Isolde found her crying in her room the night before the combat. The stern estate manager sat beside her on the bed and did something unexpected. She took Thea's hand. He'll win, Isolde said quietly. I've served Lord Valerius for 300 years. I've seen him face impossible odds more times than I can count. He always survives. But what if this time is different? Thea wiped at her eyes. What if this Razvan is really as good as they say? He's good. I won't lie to you. Isolde squeezed her hand. But Valerius fights with something Razvan doesn't have. He fights with purpose, with something worth protecting. That makes all the difference. I should never have come here. If I'd just been more careful at the gala, none of this would be happening. Do you really believe that? Isolde studied her with eyes that had seen centuries pass. Or do you think maybe some things are meant to happen? Lord Valerius has been alone for so long, isolated by his power, his responsibilities, his immortality. I've watched him grow colder over the years, more distant. Then you stumbled into his life with your clumsiness and your honesty and your complete inability to be intimidated by him for more than 5 minutes. And suddenly, he's laughing again, engaged with the world again, alive in ways I haven't seen in decades. He laughs? Thea said despite herself. I've never heard him actually laugh. You will. Isolde stood. If you have faith. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult and he'll need you to be strong. The ritual combat took place in an underground arena that Thea hadn't known existed. It was ancient, carved from living rock, with stone seats arranged in tiers around a circular fighting pit. The space was packed with vampires from multiple courts, all dressed in formal attire, all watching with the eager anticipation of those about to witness blood sport. Thea sat in the front row, directly beside the pit, in a position of honor reserved for Valerius's household. Isolde sat on one side of her, and on the other was Marcus Thorne, Valerius's second in command, a grim vampire who'd barely spoken to her before tonight. He's fighting for you, Marcus said quietly, without looking at her. Whatever happens, remember that. Remember he chose this. Valerius entered the arena first, and Thea's breath caught. He'd removed his suit jacket and tie, leaving him in just his white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He carried a sword that looked medieval, the blade gleaming with sharp promise. His white hair was loose around his shoulders, and his pale skin seemed to glow in the torchlight that illuminated the space. He looked like something from legend, beautiful and terrible and absolutely lethal. His eyes found hers across the arena, and he gave her the smallest nod. A promise. I will come back to you. Razvan entered from the opposite side, and Thea understood why Dmitri had been so confident. The Northern King was massive, easily broader and taller than Valerius, with a warrior's build and scars that spoke of countless battles. He wielded a sword that looked like it could cleave a person in half. An ancient vampire in ceremonial robes stepped into the center of the pit. "The challenge has been issued and accepted," he announced, his voice carrying through the arena without need for amplification. "King Valerius Nocturne of the Eastern Court stands accused of showing weakness in his treatment of a human who publicly disrespected him. King Razvan of the Northern Court has challenged his authority. The combat will continue until one party yields or dies. May the worthy prevail." He stepped back. Valerius and Razvan circled each other like predators, their movements fluid and cautious. "You're a fool, Valerius," Razvan said. "All this for a human girl. Has immortality made you sentimental?" "Immortality has taught me what's truly valuable," Valerius replied. "Clearly that's a lesson you've yet to learn." Razvan attacked first, his sword cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Valerius blocked, the clash of steel on steel ringing through the arena. They exchanged blows so fast Thea could barely follow the movement, each strike powerful enough to shatter stone. The fight was brutal. Razvan had youth and strength on his side, his attacks relentless and powerful. But Valerius had experience and precision, his movements economical and devastatingly efficient. He dodged where Razvan blocked, redirected where Razvan met force with force. Still, Razvan landed hits. Thea watched in horror as his blade sliced across Valerius's shoulder, drawing black blood, then across his ribs. Valerius stumbled and the crowd roared. "No," Thea whispered. Marcus grabbed her hand, holding her in place as she tried to stand. "Watch," he said. "Just watch." Razvan pressed his advantage, driving Valerius back toward the arena wall. His attacks came faster, harder, each one designed to kill. Valerius blocked, parried, dodged, but he was clearly struggling. Blood stained his white shirt. His movements had slowed. "Yield," Razvan demanded. "Acknowledge your weakness, give me the human, and I'll let you live." Valerius's eyes lifted to meet Thea's across the arena. Even wounded, even potentially dying, his gaze was fierce and sure. "Never." He moved then with speed that defied belief, all his apparent weakness vanishing like smoke. It had been a feint. He'd been drawing Razvan in, making him overconfident. Now Valerius attacked with the full force of his ancient power, his sword moving in a blur of deadly precision. Razvan tried to defend himself, but he'd overextended, overcommitted. Valerius's blade found gaps in his defense, cutting through flesh and muscle with surgical accuracy. Within seconds, Razvan was on his knees, his sword arm useless, Valerius's blade at his throat. "Yield," Valerius said softly. Razvan's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Kill me, I won't yield." "Then you're more foolish than I thought." Valerius didn't remove his blade. "This fight was never about strength. It was about you trying to expand your influence by undermining mine. But you made a critical error. You assumed I made my decision about Thea out of weakness. The truth is far simpler. I made it because I choose my own path. I bow to no one's expectations of how a king should behave. That's not weakness, that's power. And until you understand that, you'll never be more than a pretender." He removed his blade from Razvan's throat and stepped back. "I could kill you. The old laws allow it, but that would make you a martyr to those in your court who share your ambitions. Instead, you'll live with the knowledge that you challenged me at my supposed weakest moment, and still lost. Go home, Razvan. Grow wiser, and never presume to question my judgment again." The arena erupted in response, some vampires cheering, others sitting in stunned silence. Razvan stood slowly, clutching his wounded arm, his expression a mixture of fury and grudging respect. He gave a stiff bow and left without another word. Valerius turned toward Thea's seat. His wounds were already beginning to heal, the bleeding slowing as his supernatural regeneration kicked in. But his eyes remained locked on hers, and the emotion in them made her heart stutter. She didn't remember deciding to move. Suddenly, she was climbing down into the arena, protocol and propriety forgotten. She ran across the stone floor and threw herself into Valerius's arms. He caught her easily, his embrace strong despite his injuries. "You're alive," she said against his chest. "You're alive and you won and you're here." "I promised you," he murmured into her hair. I keep my promises. Somewhere in the crowd she heard vampires whispering, probably shocked that a human was embracing their king so familiarly in public. She didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Valerius was safe. That was all that mattered. Valerius pulled back just enough to look at her face. Then, in front of the entire assembled court, in front of vampires from multiple territories, he kissed her. It was claiming and tender at once, a public declaration that couldn't be misunderstood. When they broke apart, he kept one arm around her waist. Let it be known, he said, his voice carrying through the arena, that Thea Caldwell is under my personal protection. She is no longer merely my attendant. She is my chosen companion. Anyone who threatens her, insults her, or treats her with anything less than the respect due my consort will answer to me directly. This is my decree as king of the Eastern Court. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, vampires began to bow. Some looked disapproving, others seemed curious or even pleased, but they all acknowledged the announcement with the respect it demanded. Isolde appeared at the edge of the arena, her usually stern face showing something that might have been satisfaction. We should get you home, my lord. Those wounds need proper care. Valerius nodded, but he didn't release Thea. We go together. Back at the estate, Thea helped Valerius clean and bandage his wounds, even though they were healing on their own. He sat patiently in his room while she fussed over him, his eyes tracking her movements with quiet amusement. I could call one of the court healers, he said. This isn't necessary. Let me do this, Thea replied, smoothing healing salve over the cut on his shoulder. You fought for me. The least I can do is make sure you're properly cared for. I didn't fight for you, Valerius corrected gently. He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. I fought for us, for the right to choose my own path, for the future I want instead of the one tradition demands. Thea set down the bandages and cupped his face in her hands. What does that future look like? I don't know entirely. I've never tried to build a life with someone before, not in 800 years. His arms came around her waist, pulling her close. But I know it includes you, if you'll have me. I know it means figuring out how to bridge the gap between your world and mine. I know it means facing challenges we can't yet imagine. I don't care about challenges, Thea kissed him softly. I care about you. And for the record, I'll absolutely have you. Valerius smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. It was radiant and boyish and absolutely beautiful. Was that a laugh I heard earlier? Thea teased. When you were fighting and I yelled something about watching his left side? You were trying to help, Valerius said, his smile widening. It was adorable and completely unnecessary, but I appreciated the thought. I couldn't just sit there doing nothing while you fought for your life. I noticed. He pulled her down onto his lap, careful of his healing wounds. You're going to be a very dangerous consort, already disrupting centuries of protocol, making me smile in public, causing diplomatic incidents. I spilled one drink. One very important drink at one very important event. His hand came up to brush her hair back from her face. And somehow, impossibly, it brought me the best thing that's happened to me in centuries. So I consider it a fair trade. They kissed again, slower this time, with the knowledge that they had time now. No more immediate threats. No more challenges to overcome. Just the two of them, figuring out how to make this impossible relationship work. There's something you should know, Valerius said when they finally broke apart. About being my consort. Thea tensed slightly. What? It's not a temporary position. In vampire culture, a consort is a permanent bond. Not marriage exactly, but similar. It means I'm pledging myself to you for as long as you'll have me. It means I'll protect you, provide for you, and prioritize your well-being above all others, except my duty to my people. That sounds serious. It is. Extremely serious. His pale eyes searched hers. I'm not asking you to become a vampire. That's a choice you'd have to make on your own, if you ever wanted it. But I'm asking you to build a life with me, to stand at my side as my partner and equal, to help me rule, to challenge me when I'm wrong, to be the person I come home to at the end of each night. Thea's heart was so full she thought it might burst. That's everything I want. All of it. Even knowing you'll face opposition, that some vampires will never accept a human consort, that our life will be complicated and sometimes dangerous. Especially knowing all that, she kissed him again. I'm not afraid of complicated, and I'm definitely not afraid of standing beside you. Valerius held her close, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you. Too bad. You're stuck with me now. Promise? Promise. In the weeks that followed, Thea learned what it truly meant to be the consort of a vampire king. It meant attending endless political functions where ancient vampires scrutinized her every move. It meant learning to navigate court politics with the same skill she applied to graphic design. It meant finding her own power in a world designed to make her feel powerless. But it also meant waking up each evening to find Valerius watching her with soft eyes. It meant stolen moments between meetings where he'd pull her into alcoves just to kiss her. It meant late-night conversations about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. Some vampires never warmed to her presence. Lady Seraphina of the Southern Court made her disapproval known at every opportunity. Lord Victor questioned whether a human could truly understand the complexities of immortal politics. But others surprised her. Marcus Thorne became a fierce ally, respecting her intelligence and insight. Even Lucien Duval, the Western ambassador who'd seemed so hostile initially, grudgingly admitted she had a certain charm. Isolde was perhaps her greatest supporter. The stern estate manager had fully embraced Thea's role, teaching her everything she needed to know about vampire culture, traditions, and protocol. She also became something like a friend, which Thea treasured. 6 months after the ritual combat, Valerius summoned the entire Eastern Court to the estate for an important announcement. Thea stood beside his throne. Yes, he actually had a throne in a formal receiving hall she hadn't known existed, wearing a gown of deep burgundy that Isolde had selected. Her heart hammered with nervousness, but she kept her expression calm. The hall was packed with vampires of all ranks, their pale faces turned toward their king with respectful attention. Valerius stood, and the room fell silent. I've called you here to make an announcement regarding the future of our court. As you know, Thea Caldwell has served as my consort for the past 6 months. In that time, she has proven herself to be intelligent, capable, and worthy of the position. She has modernized our communications, improved our relations with human governments, and advised me on matters of policy with wisdom beyond her years. He reached down and took Thea's hand, drawing her to her feet beside him. Therefore, I am formally recognizing her as my bonded consort. She speaks with my authority in matters of court business. Her words are my words. Her decisions are my decisions. You will treat her with the respect and deference due a queen in all but name. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thea felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Furthermore, Valerius continued, I am establishing a new position within our government. Thea will serve as the court's human affairs ambassador. She will be responsible for maintaining relationships with human communities, ensuring their concerns are heard, and advising me on policies that affect both our peoples. It's time our court moved fully into the modern age, and that means building bridges rather than walls. The murmurs grew louder. Some vampires looked intrigued, others appeared skeptical, but none openly objected. Any questions? Valerius asked, his tone making it clear he wasn't really inviting debate. Lady Seraphina, because of course it would be her, stepped forward. And if the human consort makes a decision you disagree with, my lord, what then? Then we'll discuss it privately and reach a compromise, as any partnership requires. Valerius's eyes were steady on the aristocrat. But make no mistake, Seraphina. I trust Thea's judgment. If she makes a call in my name, she does so with my full confidence. Seraphina bowed stiffly and retreated. No one else challenged the announcement. After the formal gathering ended and the vampires had dispersed, Thea found herself alone with Valerius in his study. She slumped into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. That was intense, she said. Valerius poured her a glass of wine, regular wine, not blood wine, and handed it to her. You handled it perfectly. Half of them hate me. Half of them are suspicious of change. That's different from hate. He sat on the edge of his desk, facing her. You're challenging centuries of tradition simply by existing in your role. That makes people uncomfortable, but they'll adapt. They already are. Thea sipped her wine. Do you really trust my judgment that much? Or was that just political theater? I wouldn't have said it if I didn't mean it. Valerius reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You see things I don't, Thea. Your humanity gives you perspective that I, in all my centuries, have lost. You remind me why we make the laws we make, who we're supposed to protect, what truly matters. I need that. The court needs that. I love you, Thea said suddenly. I know we haven't actually said it before, but I do. I love you completely. Valerius's expression softened into that smile she'd come to cherish. I love you too, more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms. I know this life isn't what you imagined when you moved to the city for a fresh start. No, Thea agreed, wrapping her arms around his neck. It's better, scarier and more complicated and absolutely insane, but better. Even the vampire politics? Even the vampire politics. Though I'm still lobbying to reduce the number of formal galas. 3 a month seems excessive. Valerius laughed, the sound rich and warm. I'll take it under advisement. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, just holding each other. Then Thea pulled back slightly. Can I ask you something? Always. That night at the gala when I spilled the wine, why didn't you kill me? And don't say it was because you're not a monster. We both know plenty of vampires would have executed someone for far less. Why did you really spare me? Valerius considered the question carefully. Honestly, I don't know if I can explain it fully. When I looked at you standing there, terrified and apologizing, clutching that tray like a shield, I saw something. Not weakness or incompetence. I saw courage. You were clearly out of your depth, but you faced the situation head-on anyway. You didn't try to run or make excuses. You owned your mistake and waited to face the consequences. He cupped her face gently. And your fear, when I could hear your heart racing like a trapped bird, it wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of failure. Fear that you'd disappointed someone. That kind of integrity. That desire to do right even in the face of terror, that's rare. I wanted to understand it. To understand you, so I made a choice that even I didn't fully comprehend at the time. Best worst decision ever? The very best. He kissed her forehead. You've made me feel alive again, Thea. After centuries of going through the motions of rule, of politics, of endless nights bleeding into each other, you made me remember what it means to want something, to care about someone more than duty or tradition or power. You gave me back a piece of humanity I didn't realize I'd lost. Thea's eyes burned with tears. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I've had 800 years to practice my speeches. Then practice this one. She grinned up at him through her tears. Ask me to stay with you. Forever. In whatever form that takes. Valerius's pale eyes widened slightly. Thea, I know what I'm asking. I know what it means. If I want forever with you, I'll have to become like you eventually. I'm not asking for it right now. I'm still young. I want to experience human life a bit longer. But someday, when I'm ready, I want the choice. I want to know that this isn't going to end when my human lifespan runs out. Becoming a vampire isn't like the movies, Valerius said seriously. It's painful. The transformation can take days, and once it's done, you can never go back. You'd have to leave your human life behind completely. No more sunlight, no more certain foods. Your entire existence would change. I understand, and I still want the option. Thea took his hands in hers. I'm not afraid of change. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of having 60 years with you and then leaving you alone again for the next 800. That's what scares me. Valerius was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled her close and held her so tightly it was almost painful. When you're ready, he whispered against her hair, when you're absolutely certain, I'll give you forever. I'll give you everything. 2 years passed in a blur of policy meetings, diplomatic functions, and quiet moments stolen between responsibilities. Thea had fully grown into her role as human affairs ambassador. She'd established programs to help human families affected by vampire politics, created job opportunities that bridged both communities, and even started a scholarship fund for humans working in supernatural governance. She'd also become a fixture at Valerius's side at every major court function. The vampires had largely accepted her presence, and many had come to respect her opinions. She'd proven herself not just as Valerius's consort, but as a capable leader in her own right. Her relationship with Valerius had only deepened. They'd learned each other's patterns, preferences, and moods with the intimacy of true partnership. He supported her work unconditionally, and she'd become his most trusted advisor. They balanced each other perfectly, his ancient wisdom and her modern perspective, his supernatural power and her human empathy. On the 2-year anniversary of the night she'd spilled blood wine on him, Valerius took her back to the ballroom where they had first met. The space had been transformed, lit by thousands of candles, the same orchestra from that fateful night playing soft music. "Dance with me," Valerius said, offering his hand. Thea took it with a smile. "Try not to let me spill anything on you this time. I trust you completely." They moved across the floor in perfect synchronization, years of attending functions together having made them graceful partners. Thea rested her head against his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. Yes, vampires had heartbeats, just slower than human ones. "I've made a decision," she said quietly. Valerius's hand tightened slightly on her waist. "About?" "About forever." She lifted her head to look at him. "I'm ready. I want to become like you. I want to stand beside you, not just for decades, but for centuries. I want to see what the future holds, what we can build together, where this journey leads us." "Are you certain?" His pale eyes searched hers intensely. "This isn't a decision you can unmake." "I've never been more certain of anything," Thea smiled. "Except maybe that I love you." Valerius stopped dancing. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. "The transformation will take time. We'll need to prepare carefully, ensure you're as strong and healthy as possible beforehand, and you'll need to tie up any loose ends in your human life." "I know. I've been researching it for months, talking to vampires who returned later in life, learning what to expect." She touched his face gently. "I'm ready for all of it. Then we'll begin preparations." He kissed her softly. "And when you emerge from the transformation, I'll be there, every step of the way." The transformation was scheduled for 6 months later, giving Thea time to make all necessary arrangements. She quit her ambassador position officially, though Valerius promised she could return to it once she'd adjusted to her new existence. She said goodbye to old friends from her human life, telling them she was moving abroad for work. She donated most of her possessions to charity, keeping only a few precious mementos from her mother. The night before the transformation, Isolde found her sitting in her room, staring at a photo of her mother. "Second thoughts?" the estate manager asked gently. "No, just thinking about how much my life has changed." Thea traced her finger over her mother's smile. "I wish she could have met Valerius. I think she would have liked him. Once she got past the whole vampire thing. From what you've told me about her, she wanted you to be happy." Isolde sat beside her. "Are you happy?" "Deliriously." Thea set down the photo. "Even with all the complications and challenges and diplomatic headaches, I'm happier than I ever imagined being." "Then your mother would have approved." Isolde squeezed her shoulder. "Lord Valerius will take excellent care of you during the transformation. He's studied every text on the subject, consulted with the oldest vampires in the court, prepared everything perfectly. You couldn't be in better hands." "I'm not afraid of the pain," Thea said. "I'm just afraid I'll disappoint him somehow. What if I'm different after? What if becoming a vampire changes who I am fundamentally?" "You'll still be you, just stronger, faster, and with much better night vision." Isolde smiled. "The core of who you are doesn't change. Your compassion, your intelligence, your terrible sense of humor, all of that will remain." "My sense of humor is not terrible. You laughed at a pun about blood types for 5 straight minutes last week." "That was genuinely funny." Isolde stood, shaking her head with affection. "Get some rest. Tomorrow begins your new life." The transformation took place in a special chamber deep beneath the estate, designed specifically for the process. Valerius explained that new vampires sometimes lost control during the initial bloodlust, so the room was reinforced and warded for safety. Thea lay on a comfortable bed in the center of the chamber, dressed in soft clothes that wouldn't matter if they got ruined. Valerius sat beside her, holding her hand. "Last chance to change your mind," he said softly. "Nah, not changing my mind." Thea squeezed his fingers. "Let's do this." Valerius leaned down and kissed her deeply. "I love you. Remember that no matter what happens in the next few days, hold on to it." "I love you too." He kissed her throat, gentle and reverent. Then his fangs descended, and he bit down carefully, his venom mixing with her blood. The pain was immediate and intense, like liquid fire spreading through her veins. Thea gasped, but didn't pull away. Valerius pulled back after a moment, his own wrist already bleeding from where he'd cut it with his fangs. He pressed it to her lips. "Drink." She did. His blood was strange on her tongue, coppery but also sweet and impossibly powerful. The moment it entered her system, the fire in her veins intensified tenfold. She cried out, her body convulsing, but Valerius held her steady. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm right here. You're safe." The pain consumed everything. Her bones felt like they were breaking and reforming. Her senses exploded, overwhelmed by input she couldn't process. Time lost all meaning. She was aware of Valerius staying beside her through all of it, his cool hand on her forehead, his voice a constant anchor in the chaos. "Breathe, stay with me. You're doing perfectly. Just a little longer." Hours bled into days. Sometimes she was lucid enough to recognize where she was. Other times she was lost in fever dreams where the pain was all that existed. But always, always, Valerius was there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pain began to fade. Her body stopped convulsing. Her senses started to make sense again. She opened her eyes and the world was different. Everything was sharper, clearer. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could hear Valerius's heartbeat like a drum in her ears, could smell the scent of old stone and earth and something she instinctively recognized as prey somewhere far above them. "Thea?" Valerius's voice was cautious. "How do you feel?" She sat up slowly, marveling at how easy the movement felt, how strong her body suddenly was. "I feel amazing, powerful, hungry." "The hunger is normal. We'll address it carefully." Valerius helped her stand, his hand steadying her even though she didn't need the support anymore. "Look at me." She met his eyes and her breath caught. She'd always thought they were beautiful, but now she could see the complexity in them. Could see the centuries of experience, the depth of emotion, the love so intense it was almost painful to witness. "Your eyes," Valerius said softly. "They've changed, still brown but with flecks of red. Amber, beautiful." Thea moved to the mirror on the wall and gasped. Her reflection showed someone who looked like her but enhanced. Her skin was paler, luminous. Her features were sharper, more defined. Her eyes were indeed different, the brown now shot through with colors that seemed to shift in the light. "I'm still me," she whispered, "always." Valerius came up behind her, his reflection appearing beside hers. Two vampires, partners, equals. "How do you feel emotionally? Some new vampires struggle with the changes to their psyche." Thea took inventory of herself. She felt strong, confident, powerful. But she also still felt love for the man beside her, still cared about the work she'd been doing, still had all her memories and desires intact. "I feel like myself, just more." "Good." Valerius kissed her temple. "We'll take the next week slowly. You'll need to learn to hunt, to control your strength, to manage your new senses. But there's no rush. We have forever now." Forever. The word settled over her like a blessing. 3 months later, Thea stood before the assembled Eastern court, fully recovered from her transformation and ready to reclaim her position. The vampires looked at her differently now, not as a fragile human to be tolerated, but as one of their own. A powerful new vampire who'd proven her dedication by choosing to join their world permanently. Valerius stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. "My consort has completed her transformation," he announced. "She is now and forever one of us. I formally ask the court to recognize her as my bonded partner and co-ruler of the Eastern Territories." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Even Lady Seraphina bowed deeply, acknowledging Thea's new status. Marcus Thorne stepped forward with a ceremonial blade, offering it to Thea hilt first. "Welcome to immortality," he said with a rare smile. "Try not to let it go to your head." Thea took the blade with a grin. "No promises." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, as was vampire tradition for major court events. Vampires from all territories attended, curious to meet the human-turned-vampire consort who'd captured their Eastern king's heart. On the final night, Thea and Valerius slipped away from the crowds, making their way to the estate's rooftop garden. The night air was perfect, and Thea's vampire senses let her appreciate it in ways she never could have as a human. "Any regrets?" Valerius asked, pulling her close. "Not even one." Thea leaned into his embrace. "This is everything I wanted. You, me, a future with no expiration date." "I still can't quite believe you're mine." Valerius turned her in his arms so they were face to face. "That the terrified girl who spilled wine on me became the woman I can't imagine existing without. Technically, I was a woman then, too. You know what I mean." Thea laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. It was different now that she was a vampire, more equal, more passionate, without the need for him to carefully restrain his strength. They could both let go completely, and it was glorious. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless despite no longer needing to breathe, Valerius rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being clumsy. For taking a job you weren't ready for. For spilling blood wine on me at my own gala. For giving me back something I didn't know I'd lost." Thea smiled. "You're welcome. And thank you for not killing me for it. Best decision I ever made." They stood together on the rooftop, two immortals watching the city lights spread out below them, and Thea knew with absolute certainty that she'd found her place in the world, not despite the chaos that had brought them together, but because of it. Sometimes the biggest mistakes led to the greatest blessings. Sometimes spilling wine on a vampire king was exactly what you needed to do to find your forever. And as Valerius pulled her close and whispered promises of all the centuries they'd spent together, Thea couldn't imagine a more perfect beginning to their eternal story. Years turned into decades, though they passed differently now that time had lost its urgency. Thea and Valerius ruled the Eastern Court together, bringing unprecedented prosperity and progress to their territories. They revolutionized vampire-human relations, establishing councils where both species could voice concerns and work together on policy. They traveled the world, visiting ancient vampire courts and modern human cities alike. They faced challenges together, political intrigue, territorial disputes, the occasional vampire who questioned their progressive policies. But they met each obstacle as partners, their bond only strengthening with time. Thea never stopped being grateful for the night her clumsiness changed her life. She kept the dress she'd worn that evening, the one stained with blood wine, as a reminder of where they'd begun. Sometimes, when Valerius caught her looking at it, he'd pull her close and whisper the same thing he'd said that night when he'd cleared the room and changed both their destinies. "You surprised me," he'd murmur, "and you continue to surprise me, even after all this time." On the 50th anniversary of their first meeting, Valerius organized a party in the same ballroom where it had all begun. He'd invited everyone from the old court, along with the new members who'd joined over the decades. The space glittered with vampires in formal wear, the same orchestra playing the same music that had filled the air that fateful night. Thea wore a white gown this time, a deliberate contrast to the black server's uniform she'd worn before. She stood at Valerius's side at the head table, her hand clasped in his, watching their friends and court members enjoy themselves. "Should I spill something on you for old time's sake?" she teased. Valerius's pale eyes sparkled with amusement. "Please don't. I quite like this suit." "Spoil sport." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Do you remember what I thought when I first saw you that night? That I was the clumsiest person you'd ever encountered? I thought you were going to faint from fear. Your heart was beating so fast I was genuinely concerned." He smiled. "But you didn't faint. You stood your ground and apologized with such sincerity that I couldn't be angry. I was intrigued. This tiny human who'd just committed what many would consider a capital offense, and she was more worried about disappointing her employer than about her own life." "I was terrified of you," Thea admitted. "Everything I'd heard about the great vampire king Valerius made you sound like a monster. And now I know you're just a man who happens to be immortal, ridiculously powerful, and far too good at chess. She stood on her toes to kiss him. My man, my partner, my forever. The crowd noticed their kiss and erupted in applause. Vampires raised their glasses in toasts to the king and queen. Yes, Valerius had officially given her that title after 30 years of partnership. The celebration continued around them, joyful and lively, proof that their world had evolved into something beautiful. Marcus approached their table, accompanied by a young vampire Thea recognized as his recently turned daughter. My lord, my lady, Lucia wanted to thank you personally for her scholarship. The girl stepped forward shyly. She'd been human 6 months ago, a brilliant student whose family couldn't afford to send her to university. Thea's foundation had covered her tuition, and when she'd expressed interest in the vampire world, Marcus had offered to turn her with Valerius's blessing. I never thought someone like me could have these opportunities, Lucia said. Thank you for proving that our world can change, that it doesn't have to be ruled by old prejudices. Thea smiled warmly. You earned that scholarship through your own merit. We just made sure you had the chance to shine. Keep making us proud. After Marcus and Lucia left, Valerius squeezed Thea's hand. You've changed so much in these territories, given so many people hope they never had before. We've changed things, Thea corrected. I could never have done any of it without you supporting me, trusting me, giving me the authority to make real differences. I fell in love with a woman who saw possibilities where others saw only tradition. You've made me a better king, Thea, a better person. If we're trading compliments, you made me brave enough to become more than I ever imagined being. They were interrupted by Isolde, who approached with an amused expression. My lord, my lady, there's been an incident in the kitchen. One of the new servers dropped an entire tray of blood wine. Thea and Valerius looked at each other and burst out laughing. Some things never changed. Is anyone hurt? Valerius asked, composing himself. Only his pride. He's convinced you're going to have him executed. Send him to us, Thea said. I think we owe it to him to explain that spilling drinks is not actually a capital offense in our court. A few minutes later, a terrified young vampire was brought before them. He couldn't have been turned more than a year ago, and he looked ready to die of embarrassment. I'm so sorry, your majesties, he stammered. I don't know what happened. My hands just slipped and the tray went everywhere, and I've ruined everything. Stop, Valerius said gently. The boy froze. What's your name? Felix Zimmerman, your majesty. Well, Felix Zimmerman, let me tell you a story about the night I met my wife. Valerius glanced at Thea with unmistakable affection. She was a brand new server at her very first vampire event. She was nervous, overwhelmed, and when I looked at her, she panicked and spilled blood wine all over me in front of the entire court. Felix's eyes went wide. Queen Thea, you did? I absolutely did, Thea confirmed, drenched him completely. It was mortifying. And yet, Valerius continued, that moment of clumsiness became the best thing that ever happened to me. It started a conversation that changed my life forever. So no, Felix, you're not going to be executed for dropping a tray. You're going to clean up the mess, finish your shift, and learn from the experience. Mistakes happen. How we respond to them is what matters. Felix looked like he might cry from relief. Thank you, your majesty, both of you. I'll never drop anything again, I swear. After he left, practically running in his eagerness to get back to work, Thea leaned against Valerius's shoulder. We're getting soft in our old age. We're getting wise, Valerius corrected. There's a difference. The party continued into the early morning hours, finally winding down as dawn approached. Vampires said their goodbyes and departed for their various homes, all needing to reach shelter before the sun rose. Thea and Valerius retired to their private chambers, the same rooms they'd been sharing for 50 years. The space was familiar and comfortable, filled with touches from both their lives, her design awards on one shelf, his ancient texts on another, photographs from their travels covering one entire wall. As they prepared for bed, Valerius wrapped his arms around Thea from behind, meeting her eyes in their reflection in the mirror. 50 years, he said softly. The first of many such anniversaries. Feeling sentimental? Thea teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. Always when it comes to you. He kissed her neck gently. I love you, Thea Caldwell Nocturne. I loved you when you were human and terrified. I loved you when you were learning to be my consort. I loved you through your transformation, and I love you now as my partner in every sense of the word." Thea turned in his arms, her own eyes shining. "I love you too, in every life, in every form, in every moment we've shared and all the ones to come." They made their way to bed, holding each other close as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky beyond their blackout curtains. Safe in their sanctuary, in each other's arms, they let sleep claim them. And if Thea dreamed of a clumsy waitress spilling wine on a vampire king, setting in motion a love story that would span centuries, she woke with a smile, knowing every moment of their impossible journey had been worth it. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic moments that defined their love. It was the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they belonged, exactly who they were meant to be, together for all the eternities to come. One spilled drink, one moment of panic, one decision to show mercy instead of cruelty. That's all it had taken to change everything. And as Valerius held his queen close and whispered promises into her hair as she promised him forever in return, they both knew that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest mistakes. Their story wasn't ending. It was only beginning, and they had all the time in the world to write the rest of it together, forever.